Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. My name is Tom Forden, and I'm the chair and organizer of Grand Rounds. May the 4th be with you. It is Star Wars Day today, and we were just saying, Fiona was just saying there that she's not slipped any Star Wars references in, but I've managed to get to make amends. Grand Rounds, I said in the email, is for everyone, and we try to be inclusive and in terms of the speakers and the content. But inevitably, some talks gravitate more towards one of the professions within medicine. And this week, it is more directed towards doctors. But I think the themes are very much applicable to the multidisciplinary group in general. So hopefully, you'll find this interesting and helpful. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Fiona Drimmie, who's one of the Associate Postgraduate Deans here in the East of Scotland, who I've known for many, many years. And she has worked in many areas within NES and the Deanery, and is now focusing on her role in the Trainee Development and Wellbeing Service, the TDWS, which is not an acronym that flows easily off the tongue, and I get it wrong frequently. She's going to be followed by Jordan Napier, who is no stranger to Grand Rounds, who's going to talk about local efforts to improve wellbeing support of trainers, and Achyut Valluri, who is one of our training program directors and also has a role with the DME in supporting international medical graduates and holistic care of everybody, as Achyut looks after all of us. So they're going to manage their own slides. I'll shut up. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. Mute your microphones as always. And Fiona, thanks very much. Looking forward to some sort of mnemonic to remember TDWS a bit better.
And they get worse as I go on. Anyway, thank you very much for the introduction, Tom, and thank you for having me along to give a bit of an update along with the DME team and colleagues around about what's available. So I would like to spend a little bit of time, about 20 minutes, going through some aspects of the Trainee Development and Wellbeing Service, which is our most recent offering in the same lines as we've done for many years from the Deanery. And I suppose the background to come into this as a topic is recognizing that we can all be going along quite happily, not knowing what's coming up for us, and we can have situations that are out of our control and that can make life suddenly become very difficult. I think I like this set of slides particularly because I think it also shows that sometimes the challenges and the difficulties that we're working with can seem invigorating. We can be feeling very much in charge of these things. We can be learning from them, and it all feels great. And then suddenly that can change, and you could be like the people on the other side of the boat who are scrambling and struggling to keep where they want to be, to get things back on an even keel. And those can happen in many different situations in very many different ways for all of us. And part of the role that I have is in trying to assist that when it comes to trainees. And today's an opportunity just for me to share what that currently looks like and to let you know how you might access it, and perhaps to have, if there's opportunity to take some questions, I'd be happy to do that. I think part of the talk as it stands at the moment for this service has changed from what it would have been 5 years ago, because I think, like many aspects of what we do, COVID has really had an impact on all of our working lives, and I see that particularly for trainees. Our services, some of how that's organised, the pressures that continue to exist that were there through COVID. And if you're a very junior trainee, your experience have only been post-COVID, and for some doctors who are foundation doctors or senior medical students at the time the pandemic hit, these are very, perhaps much even heavier on them than they are on some of the rest of us. I think that we saw through that period increased concerns about people's health and well-being for themselves. Childcare was a significant issue. There were rota gaps, there was shielding. And all those things have to some extent now faded, but they are still very much there. And I think, I don't know, but for many people, I find that the days when I have to come into the hospital and put my mask on again, I think, oh gosh, right, it still hasn't gone away. Whereas you sometimes forget about it when you're out and about living your day-to-day life. I think this is also very helpful. And I think we saw the COVID pressures on top of what was already perhaps a change that's happened since the millennium about how our working lives are changed with social media, with the connectivity that we all have, with the pace of change, that looking for trainee support, we recognise that we really need to be planning for the future, because that's where the rest of the life is. So we're not going back from the changes we made during COVID and during the pandemic. We're also not going back to before we had smartphones at every turn and the way that we train and the way we lived our lives. So we needed to try and adapt what we were offering as a deanery for what is coming in the future to support trainees. So the deanery has always provided support. I've done this job since 2006, and what I actually do and speak to trainees about is very much the same as it's always been. I've learned a lot, so I'm perhaps better at it than I used to be. But performance support, which is the name and title that we used to work in, has always been there. And we also have a significant amount of support and availability of resource around assisting trainees in working flexibly in less than full-time posts if they can. And there is a careers advisory service, because careers in medicine can be very varied, and sometimes a trainee maybe requires support because actually they're just in the wrong place for them. So those things have always existed. The PSU element really did change quite dramatically during the pandemic, and this is a slide just showing that we recognise that referrals, which were mostly referrals at that point from trainers, went up pretty dramatically during that period of time, and most of those referrals were from trainers. As you can see, only 6% were trainees getting in touch with us themselves to say that they could really do with some help or some additional support. And some trainees will have more than one meeting, so there's more contacts than there are referrals. So over the sort of 2020, 2021, 2022 year, there was a refresh, about a year working group looking at what we would like to be offering as Scotland Deanery for supporting trainees. And that included a change of name, and it became a much more inclusive input. The name, I would like to say, was chosen by trainees. We wanted something that would hopefully give trainees a way to go looking for their own personal development within the Scotland Deanery website, recognising that they might have a development need or a wellbeing need, and be able to access support before it has any impact on their training or progress, and that we would be making this something that was some really accessible. So it incorporates those of us that have always worked in professional support, but also our less than full-time and careers colleague. And the TDWS name is what we are branded from now on. And we're aiming that we will work very collaboratively. And our goal will be at the end of the day that we are much more multifactorial, so that it wouldn't have been uncommon for me to see a trainee in my professional support role and then refer them for less than full-time and careers to other colleagues. And I may still do that for some trainees, but we would like to get to a situation where most of us working in the service feel comfortable to offer the majority of this. So we're looking for it to be one-stop support as possible. We are aiming for this to become something that you go to yourself spontaneously when you could do with a bit of extra help, rather than being something that people saw as a punishment. You're just not getting on brilliantly in your training schemes, therefore you must go to PSU and be seen in a way that people were often quite fearful of. Very much not once they'd actually met us, but often at the end of a meeting, people would sort of say to me, "Oh, this was all right. I was dreading seeing you because I thought it was a punishment of some kind." So we want to get away from that if we can. We want to use our team flexibly, and it is across regions. This is a Scotland service, which helps us to respond a bit faster because we can share out the need for appointments, and that's very much because we've now moved to working online, as we all tend to do, and that works well for trainees. So I think just this little piece of information, we don't have a lot of hard data yet. We only became into being as TDWS last November, so we're in process of developing these things, but actually we are looking at our admin team doing a lot of triage. So people will get in touch with a question that actually may well be better answered by their health board if it's something about notice of contracts, for example. It's not something that we would help with. Or it might be something that TPD would be able to answer and help with. So our admin team do a fair amount of triage, and they're triaging about 80 to 100 contacts each month. Within those people that we actually need to see, The majority are people looking for less full-time training. That's a big part of what we do. A small amount is careers input, and the rest is looking for support in different settings. And what I think is really encouraging about this is that we're seeing a third of them already being people coming directly to us as trainees, and hopefully that will continue to increase. That's a real goal that we have. I'm just watching my time. So we now have a separate part on the website. It's in the banner that runs across the top of the Scotland Deanery. It's at the far right, and then when you click into it, you will find this web page. And then beyond that, there are different subtext areas that you can look at. This is definitely a work in progress. There are some bits that have got quite a lot of information and things that you can look at, and others that are a bit lighter. But please do go in, use it. If you've got feedback, let us know, because then we can try to improve it. I then like to just go over what we do. So we offer meetings with our trainee support coach. That's what I would get called. I'm not a formally trained coach. It's not formal coaching, but it is a person who is neutral. I'm not part of the training program for the trainee. I'm not sitting on their RP. I'm not in their department working on their rotas. So it's a very neutral place to be. It's a confidential meeting unless there are significant safety issues where we have the typical professional responsibilities. We offer some mentoring, some advice, some advocacy. We can signpost to resources. We can often help navigating some of the other things that need to be done. And the outcome of this is a report that is shared with myself and the trainee to their trainers and others that may need to know. We don't do all these other things, and these things still sit with trainers, departments, TPDs, training leads. We don't decide about competency. We don't diagnose, manage complaints, decide if somebody's fit for work, manage their training needs, or treat mental health. And sometimes it could be really helpful for people to understand what they are not getting. So some of the practical things that I would do are things like support around exams. High stakes exams, anxiety become an enormous issue. Dyslexia is a recognised place. There people are struggling. And what we would really be hoping is that either self-referring or referred by trainers, that we would see trainees, certainly if they failed a written exam on 2 occasions, potentially sooner. Things like general practice where the training scheme is so short. If we wait for 2 exam fails, the trainees almost completely at the end of their training. So if you've got an unexpected or a bad exam fail and somebody you wouldn't expect it, or if you're seeing other things that might be suggestive of dyslexia, then send trainees our way. The deanery will support a full dyslexia assessment if the trainee fails the screening test. The screening test they have to pay for, but we direct them to it, and it's only about £35. That can be really helpful for trainees. Sometimes all they need is the extra training time and exams, and they'll pass. I also run the subgroup about organisational, interprofessional and communication skills, which I'm going to not jump through the next few slides. But organisational skills are a kind of issue that trainees really may be struggling with. They may have always struggled with them, and it becomes an increasing problem as they move through postgraduate education. And we have opportunity to help them explore what they're struggling with in those situations. We would recognise that quite a lot of the people who really struggle with organisation, it can be an indicator for another neurodivergent condition. And we would recognise now, very recently, a lot of the work we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years in NES is trying to see how we can support people who would recognise that they are in a neurodivergent grouping, whether that's a person, an autistic or an ADHD person. We do encourage that we look at a strengths and challenges model. I'm always quite struck when I look at this particular slide that if you look at the ADHD box, you can see why people like medicine who have ADHD. You're quick-witted, energetic, ability to hyper-focus, empathetic, expressive, gregarious. Not everybody's gregarious, but I can see why people with those tendencies who are academically capable may end up in medicine. And recognizing that the strengths that people bring with their own personality, is important to have an understanding of that and the challenges that that can sometimes bring. And we are working really hard in the deanery at the moment in improving what we are able to offer to support trainees and departments who may need some additional support around these areas. However, we don't offer diagnostic services. So that is a frustration for many trainees who may begin to think that they have got ADHD, but we cannot get you up a waiting list and we can't pay for an assessment. So it's about trying to support trainees thinking around this. We are also sometimes able to help and support around other wellbeing and health areas, although there's actually a lot on offer elsewhere from health boards. So we're sometimes just signposting back to things within a health board that can happen to do this. And we can also beginning to develop a toolkits that are available to support some of the other communication and interpersonal situations. I'm really just touching on these because I don't have a lot of time to go into any of them in detail. We would recognise that we are part of the process that can sometimes help trainees cope with the resilience and their health and happiness in their working life. And there are many different areas to that which we will be able to work on. One of the things I think I quite like to put this slide up at the moment, because I think when we are trainers and we're looking at a trainee's journey, we are often thinking about the top two parts of this pyramid, where we're looking at people's professional roles and their esteem and their self-actualization in their role. But actually, in the current climate, and particularly for some of our, well, for any of our trainees, to be honest, but I think a lot of trainees can at times be quite stretched actually just in the physiology and safety aspects of their working environments and their home situations. Shorter term contracts, cost of living prices going up, some people perhaps having come from abroad who can really struggle with some of these things. So I do quite a lot of checking in these days about things further down this pyramid than I would have done. And we would all recognise that working environment has a huge impact on how we actually feel day to day. And this is where the shared responsibility between the deanery and the DME teams and ourselves in our working environment are very much around making these work for us and for trainees. We can advise about health as far as helping to direct trainees about how to engage about their own health and to support departments in thinking about how they might interact with occupational health and so on to support health. We don't actually do any of the direct advice situation around this, but we have a lot of experience in our role in supporting health matters, so we're keen to do that. We often have quite a lot of conversations about returning to work, and I just put in a couple of slides about this to remind you as trainers that these can be real critical points if you're looking at supporting trainees, recognising that after maternity leave or other planned time off work, there are still these huge loss of confidence and a feeling of less resilience than trainees would have had before. And if that's been an unplanned absence for a sickness event or some other major life event, those are even greater. So having those conversations around to return to work is really helpful. And these are just some data around the kinds of things that trainees feel concerned about when they are coming back after a significant absence. And this affects everybody, it affects consultants and other permanent staff as well as trainees. But I would just like to highlight this to trainers because I think it's a really key factor that you could proactively manage in your conversations with trainees. And these are just some, there's a subgroup of the TDWS which have been looking at return to work and trying to have resources available for trainees and trainers to try and ease these transitions and help it work better for trainees when they come back. This is just a screenshot of our webpage. If you go in behind that big one that I showed you at the beginning, and you can see links to where each of our subgroups are putting information. And there are two very simple forms that you fill in, a trainee one and a trainer one. And these are really very, very simple, particularly the trainee one asks for pretty much nothing about what they, other than what they decide to type in the details of the inquiry box, and this will trigger a contact. And I think part of the reason we're managing to get trainees to come directly to us is because we've made this really simple, and in time it may be that you could use a QR code, but this on its own seems to have really helped. And there's a slightly more complicated one for the trainers, and we are probably working this up a bit because we found that we've probably been asking too much from trainers in the past, and we perhaps just gone a little bit too far in the other direction for having just some background information about to work on. And that's me. I'm happy to take questions just now, but I'm also happy to just move on and do things together at the end, depending what works best. I'll let Tom guide us about that.
There's no questions in the chat just now, and I can't see hands. So we just move on to Jordan. Whilst she's sharing a screen, and there we go. And then we'll just take questions at the end. So just to remind everyone, if you do have questions, please stick them in the chat, even just a note to remind yourself to ask a question at the end.
Perfect. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Tom.
I can't see your screen. I can unless I'm doing something daft.
Can you see it, Fiona?
No, I can't either. It says that you have started screen sharing, but it doesn't show me a picture.
Yeah.
I will try again.
Try again.
Let's try this way.
There we go. All good now. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Tom. I'm just going to kind of blend into the narrative of what we're discussing by picking up on how trainers are supported at NHS Tayside. Less specifically around wellbeing and more specifically around their educator skills. However, I've definitely found, probably in particular over the last 3 years, that a lot of our conversations about what it means to be an educator have started being more about how to support student, trainee and personal wellbeing. One of the key statements within the NHS Tayside Directorate of Medical Education about what the purpose of this team is ensuring that staff are supported and well trained in medical education delivery. And I suppose that's one of the key bits of my role as staff development lead. Apologies, I didn't say that at the beginning. But my main role revolves around helping our educators develop their skills as educators, but I suppose also develop their awareness of all the different things that impact on education and training. And I like the fact that Fiona had used the Maslow's hierarchy slide, because that's something that I'm always encouraging our trainers to think about, how we make sure that we're viewing teaching and learning and our students and trainees in a holistic way, and making sure that all those needs are being met before we try and push on and be very innovative in our training approaches. So I'm just going to share with you how we support trainers in Tayside in their role as trainers. So one of the key things is the Enhancing Learning in Medicine programme that I run. It's a core set of development workshops. It's taken over from what used to be called core skills a few years ago. We've moved away from it being about skills, and it's more about values and attitudes and reflecting on your role as an educator and helping to equip you to make improvements to your teaching and training, focusing around these 4 different points. So designing, facilitating, supporting and assessing. And within these sessions, we're looking at how we improve things for our students, but we're also looking at your well-being as an educator and how we equip you to do the best job you can and support you to do that. At the moment, these sessions are mainly delivered online, but we're also bringing in some face-to-face elements as well. People's feedback has been that they want to do this online rather than face-to-face, but we do appreciate that when we bring people together in person, the conversation can be a lot richer. So we'll continue to do both. We've also got a menu of different options that we can bring to your department. So maybe you identify a learning need for the trainers within your department around facilitating feedback conversations, around assessment, writing learning outcomes. It could be anything that's not on this list as well with regards to supporting struggling trainees or supporting struggling students. We as a department are very happy to be contacted and asked to deliver something in-house that's more bespoke to your needs as a trainer group. So please do just get in touch. Within the team, we've got myself, Dr. Claire Stubbings, who's a GP and a faculty development trainer, and we are happy to come to your department, whether that's online or in person, to support the delivery of some of this stuff. We also appreciate that time is tight and that people are not always able to carve out time in their day to specifically attend a training session. We've got a range of different online modules to support you as an educator, and these have been sort of co-designed with clinical educators based on what they say they need. So we've got modules on teaching clinical reasoning, on facilitation skills, on getting the most out of clinical teaching, and more. And I'm going to pop a link into the chat box at the end of my chat here, where you can explore all these different things. But this enables you to get some ideas, to reflect on your educator role without having to specifically attend a session. And this is just some of the feedback that we've had from educators about our offering so far. There's been more mindfulness about interaction with junior colleagues and an opportunity to reflect really as being the key thing. And helpful nuggets that are accessible within the working day to refocus on delivering high quality teaching. So I suppose one of the core things that I'm trying to do is to give trainers space just to think about what they're doing as trainers, to reflect on what's going well and what's not going so well, and come up with some plans for how we can improve it. And whether that's about supporting the trainer in their well-being and juggling of their different responsibilities, or whether it's about specific educational interventions we put into place to support trainees and students. It's really supposed to be very staff-centred. So I would really encourage you just to bookmark this webpage. I'm going to pop it into the chat box. And there's my email address there and the staff development email address there. So if you think that you might want to have something delivered in your department, please do just get in touch and we'll do our best to facilitate it. And that is me. I really made up time. And I'm going to hand over to Atchit.
Thank you, Jordan. Now I'm just about to share my screen, but I'm also going to change how I'm going to share my screen. So just give me 2 ticks. I'll get this positioning right. So I suppose just, thank you first of all to Fiona and Jordan. It's really great to hear about, the resources that NES have to sort of support our doctors in training, and great to hear about what our Director of Medical Education and University of Dundee are doing to support our trainers. But what I wanted to do is just take about 10 minutes to talk about how we can better support a very specific group of doctors, namely international medical graduates, IMGs, that have come to work in Scotland and in Tayside in particular. So starting to work in a new environment is going to be challenging for any new member of staff, but this is going to be made ever so more difficult if you're landing in a new country, so it's often with very little time to acclimatise before plunging into work. And the best analogy I've heard is probably the difficulty setting on video games. And with each source of disadvantage, and I suppose they're most commonly those protected characteristics, but also include things like socioeconomic background, place of primary medical qualification, with each one of them, it just kind of ramps up the difficulty level. So is it any wonder then that the GMC reported that between 2010 and 2014, I think it was 5.9% of international medical graduates were investigated due to a complaint received against them, compared to 3.9% of UK medical graduates. But to make things worse, the source of that referral to the GMC was actually most commonly that doctor's employer, and it wasn't their patients. So surely there's more our organisations really should be doing to help before things get to that stage. So each year, the GMC produces a report on the state of medical education and practice in the UK. And the latest report focused on workforce and opened with these 2 graphs. So, just in case it doesn't quite come through, but the first highlighted that international medical graduates who joined the workforce actually outnumbered UK and European Economic Area graduates in 2021, with doctors from South Asia, Middle East and Africa mainly driving that increase. Now, the second graph highlighted that though a significant number of these will be in training programs, the majority of those new start IMG docs are locally employed trust grade clinical fellow type posts. And the report made another important point, that there's been quite a sharp increase in UK nationals with their primary medical qualification from Eastern European medical schools in particular joining the workforce. And though these individuals won't face the same challenges in dealing with sort of language and culture outside of the workplace, it's important to remember that they won't have experienced the UK healthcare system in the same way. So they also need some form of enhanced induction. Now, for those that are landing in training programs, NES have developed a very structured framework to help trainers identify and meet the specific needs for those new to the country and our healthcare system. So the aim of that Softer Landing Safer Care initiative is that each New Start IMG doc should have an individualized action plan put in place. I suppose, firstly, discussing that person's basic human needs, and I'm completing that Maslow's triad that we've talked about now. So first of all, do they have accommodation? Secondly, how do they get to work? Do they have a bank account? Do they actually have enough funds till the end of the month before they receive their first paycheck? Do they have family, children? Has the whole family emigrated? And what about schooling, childcare, that kind of thing? And then provide appropriate support, guidance, and signposting for all those things that we just take for granted. Now, the second part is to undertake a more of an individualized need assessment based on 4 domains: language, culture, previous medical education, and belonging. And the aim is to develop a plan of action during that 2 weeks of supernumerary work to be reassessed at that end of that period and further support as required. I suppose practicalities of rota planning aside, that sounds like a very sensible approach. But the main problem, as we've seen, is that with many New Start IMGs, many of them are not going to be in training posts, and so might be asked to jump in at the deep end, perhaps left to sink or swim. So over the past 18 months, I've been running a program within the Medicine Directorate of employing a number of FY level clinical fellows to bolster our cohort of deanery funded FYs, essentially to ensure that rotas are adequate both in and out of hours to tend to the needs of service, but also training as well as staff wellbeing. Now, every single applicant to that program has been an international medical graduate, many of whom have had little experience of working in the UK. So using NES's Softer Landing Safer Care document as a blueprint, I began developing a program of induction and importantly ongoing support for those doctors. And over that first year, an interested group of my own IMG fellows came together with the idea that we make that level of support more widespread. So we put together a package of support for any IMG FY that started in Tayside in August last year. And as I joined the Director of Medical Education, primarily around promoting the use of the WeCare tool to improve rotas, and that's a whole separate topic, I became involved with IMG support more broadly. And based on feedback from August, our little group developed this sort of framework for local IMG induction support that we trialled with this February's IMG intake, which we're then sort of planning on tweaking further for the big changeover in August. So before each changeover, NES do provide a spreadsheet of doctors in training that are IMGs and either new to the NHS or have less than 6 months experience. But that list obviously does not include doctors in non-training grade posts that are employed by the Health Board. So we reached out to Tayside's Medical Recruitment Office to provide details of locally employed doctors who are international medical graduates. Now, from experience, neither list is wholly accurate. So as part of the pre-employment information pack sent out to all new starts, there was an email included from me asking if they considered themselves an IMG and to follow the links for info on available avenues of support and how to access them. I then followed it up with targeted emails to those on our lists. Now, as it turned out, some of the people that were identified as IMGs didn't consider themselves as such and took a bit of offence. But I suppose you can't really please all the people all the time. Now, part of our pre-arrival information naturally focused on the practicalities of settling into life in Tayside, and was based on frequently asked questions and tips from previous IMGs. So it did include really useful local information. Other areas have actually gone as far as contacting bank managers, local bank managers, to ensure the health board's one of the official trusted employers, and have partnered with letting agents and third sector housing organisations to make sure finding a place to stay is as painless as possible, because that has been a big issue for our IMGs this year. So things that we should start looking into for the August changeover. Actually, here there's a trust in Northern Ireland that went as far as actually picking up people from the airport and getting in their first shop, so they've got stuffed from the get-go. So Grant, Archibald, just in case you're watching, something for us to consider. But I suppose it's important for us to also emphasize the need to register with a local GP, and the need to sort of seek medical indemnity cover, things that we just assume that people know that they don't necessarily. So last August, we were also quick to establish a Facebook group and WhatsApp groups to connect new doctors, allowing them to ask and answer each other's questions, as well as connecting them to the IMG docs that have preceded them, who are then able to share their experience and advice. You organised a couple of meals out, which were well attended, and help people connect in person to their peers, as well as to more senior docs like me. Arranging training around the practicalities of work, such as clinical tasks, as well as test requesting and using sort of local IT systems, was something that was strongly requested, and received glowing feedback, but did require a fair amount of people power and careful scheduling. But an area we paid particular attention to was around communication. Even moving around the UK, picking up on local accents and teasing apart local colloquialisms can be a challenge for any of us. Never mind if your first experience of Dundee is from a flat in the hill town. And then there's getting used to the way we communicate between colleagues and with our patients that may be quite different to where our new docs have trained. So topics we covered was including use of SBAR for handover and making referrals, as well as shared decision-making conversations with patients. Now, for several years now, the GMC have been running free half-day, now online workshops on this, plus guidance on the sort of common ethical challenges that face doctors working in the UK. So I do some work on the side as a GMC associate and run these Welcome to UK Practice workshops. And I've partnered with colleagues from the GMC to run these sessions locally for our own new start IMGs. But an area we really need to strengthen for August is ensuring that all locally employed doctors have a named supervisor and mentor. And that ongoing relationship, I think, is key to tackling those issues of differential attainment and the differences in referrals that we see to the GMC. So, as the person responsible for the FY level clinical fellows in medicine, I've been able to provide this for my docs. And I've no doubt there's probably other departments, directorates are doing similar work. But what we really need to do is connect those dots and share examples of good practice and spread that approach, both locally within Tayside, but also nationally. Because I know, for example, Fife, NHS Fife really focuses in on and supports that doctor-supervisor relationship. So this initiative was developed between NHS England, what was NHAE, and GMC and BMA, and was launched south of the border to great fanfare last June. Now, to be honest, it largely mirrored the framework that was already laid out in NESA's softer landing document. But one thing it did really emphasize was that all new start IMG docs should have this named supervisor mentor. And it made it clear that it was the responsibility of the employer to ensure that happens. And I think this is really something that NHST needs to make a similar commitment to our IMG docs that it employs to provide the care that our patients need. Now, as ever, this is all a work in progress. And we're using feedback from each cohort to further refine what we're doing and sort of systematize and building things like videos that, you know, the system down south has done really well. But I suppose we're not just basing on feedback from what we're hearing in Docs and Tayside, but linking into a wider Scottish IMG support group network to importantly share and spread best practice. And one thing I've come across recently was a brilliant simulation-based program for refugee doctors run from Forth Valley that I'm planning on testing for our new IMG cohort in August. So, you know, if anyone out there wants to get involved, please do let me know. But in the meantime, you know, any thoughts, suggestions, questions, more than welcome. So I'll hand it back over to Tom to look at any sort of questions in the chat box there. Thank you.
Thanks very much to all three of you for those talks, all keeping to time, and some really interesting stuff. There's a lot of work going on, and not necessarily that very obvious that the work's going on. The swan with the pedal, with the paddling feet underneath, a huge amount of work. And Fiona has been in her role since 2006, I think she said, when I was a registrar.
Yeah, I remember you.
Oh yeah, I'm sure I was delightful. But I've been involved in the deanery for a long time, and I worked for the DME many years ago. So I can see the changes that have happened. I can see the development that's happened over the last nearly 2 decades. And I think Tayside is really pushing on locally, and those relationships we now have between the DME and the deanery and service are really much better than where we were in places 2 decades ago, and it's really impressive and very encouraging. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience? So somebody's got their microphone on. If you don't want your conversation recorded, perhaps mute yourself. Lovely. So we've got Sanjay has said, Achat, really good work. I was this IMG 25 years ago, wish I'd had this support. And I think we should point out, you know, that I think you alluded to this, Achat, that not all IMG struggle. And we have some absolutely fabulous IMG trainees and consultant colleagues. Sanjay is on my screen big and bright now as an example. But the evidence is clear that IMGs do, there are a subgroup that do struggle and do, as you've highlighted, this differential attainment group is real, and working out how to support people is the challenge.
There's a question there from Christiana, Tom, yeah, but I'm not quite sure that I understand it.
Let's read it out. So how would you describe specifically evidence of pastoral support provision for the internationally recruited staff members? I think is what that says.
I think that's probably aimed at you, Achat.
Achat.
Yeah. So I suppose with the pastoral support mentorship role, there's 2 bits of it. There's, first of all, just making sure there's that ongoing relationship in the same way that, you know, all local UK graduates get, so we don't see this widening of opportunities which might be leading to that differential attainment. So there's that ongoing support. So we're just making sure that, you know, everybody has the same equality of opportunity support, which might get to some of the, you know, the difficulties that non-locally IMG docs can get. But also the other part of it is, you know, IMG docs bring a wealth of experience and knowledge and skills that local docs just haven't had the exposure to. So that ongoing support mentorship thing is to kind of develop that and get people into those educational research leadership roles, that they can bring something beyond the kind of the workhorse bit to the NHS as well. So there's 2 big bits of it.
Anna McDonald has asked, are there IMG welcome documents that departments can use? So do you have some sort of generic documents that can be pulled into departments and then perhaps modified, adjusted for the specific areas?
Yeah, so I suppose what this has been rolling out over the last year, initially just starting in medicine and all FYs, and then in February it was all IMG. So the HR department have our, you know, welcome to UK, welcome to Tayside stuff that everybody does get even before they've arrived. What we probably need is specialty specific induction things that talk to, you know, what assumptions do we make about what local graduates know that international non-local graduates won't know. And that bit's the bit that we're working on, you know, kind of specialty specific induction. But, you know, our HR department does have the general welcome stuff, which has, you know, loads of information about settling into Tayside that I only just learned myself as well with all of that.
Sanjay has said we have done something similar for our internationally recruited consultant colleagues. Sanjay, do you want, I know that you've been heavily involved in recruitment of international consultant colleagues. Do you want to share your experiences?
Yeah, Tom. You know, the most crucial bit is them getting used to the system rather than their clinical knowledge, because most of them are pretty good. Some of them are much better than me. So it's Fiona would know in pediatrics. We have a pediatric radiology colleague who's gelled in very, very, very quickly. In 2 or 3 weeks, she just became part of the team. And there are some people who take longer. Again, not because of lack of knowledge or clinical skills. It's just getting used to the system. And that's where the support is needed. And what Achit said, when you come in registering with a GP, finding a place to live, how to dress, what to eat. You know, this was much different when we came a long time ago. Currently, with the internet, people are much more aware of things. So it is slightly easier than it was before. But that support from people around them in the department, wherever they work, that is the most crucial bit. And it doesn't stop for, you know, the first few months. It is a continuous process. And, you know, these people very quickly become your friends and colleagues. You know, that's how it is. So that I think is the aspect all of us need to understand when working with them when they're new to a country. I was saying to, you know, Achit, I'm happy to help in any way, right?
I think there is something about role modeling and for our trainees particularly, to see people like them from similar backgrounds who've succeeded, achieved great things, and are in positions of leadership, such as you are, Sanjay. You know, that you can say that you were there 20, maybe more years ago.
5.
And I think that's really valuable, that role modeling aspect. There are, of course, some of our international medical graduates who do struggle clinically. That is a reality. And I think it's important to point out that from the deanery point of view, from the training program management, so that's the bit I do, not the bit that Fiona does. We do have structures in place to be able to support those trainees, and a big part of that is identifying what the problem is. And we have structures in place to determine if people have foundation competencies, if they have their core competencies. But we need to know, and we need to know early, and we need to, so that we can start to work with the trainees to determine what those issues and problems are. And we have the facility to offer remedial training, particularly for people who don't have foundation competencies. And we've done that successfully locally in the last couple of years. There are more questions now. It's streaming in. Claire Webb has said, have you linked in with clinical skills in the university? We do postgraduate simulation-based training, Neil Harrison being the lead. Claire, actually, that's directed at you.
Yeah, no, the plan for August is to kind of basically replicate this Bridges Refugees Doctors Sim program in Tayside. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely on the to-do list. With Paul Fetters is already kind of involved in the Bridges bit, so it's on the to-do list. But thank you.
Francis Travis says, apologise if I missed this, Jordan, but does your service support trainers to develop skills beyond supporting trainees' clinical skills? So she's mentioned improving time management and prioritisation, etc. Or would DWS support trainers in this area?
Yeah, I've said that my remit's mainly covering developing educator skills. So if it was trainees that were needing support around those organisation skills, it would be the TWDS. And yeah, I'm mainly looking at supporting people in their teaching skills. But I get lots of odd requests, and I'm always able to signpost to somewhere appropriate. So if there's anything specific, you can get in touch.
there is a time management and prioritization program in foundation training, I think. I'm not sure about in core things though. Anna McDonald, thanks Fiona. I know of cases in England where ADHD screening was paid for by the deaneries. Does this happen in Scotland?
Yeah, I'd quite like to have a minute to come back to that, because I think it's a really important thing. And the answer is no. We are within the OICS subgroup sort of thinking about how we can do this, but to be honest, it would also be quite unfair in a lot of ways, because the staff that would do this would be the same staff that would be doing it within all NHS trusts anyway, and there are huge waiting lists. So at the moment, if people are considering that they may have a diagnosis that they want to have made, then looking for getting themselves on a waiting list early or potentially self-funding are the only ways that could go forward. Once a diagnosis is made, then that becomes an employer responsibility. So for trainees that are employed by NES, there are actually quite a few things that we can immediately access. For people who are employed by health boards, that is a bit more difficult and something that we're still working on. I think it's an area that we will see change quite a lot over the next 3 to 5 years. And I would encourage people to look out for opportunities to just educate themselves about neurodiversity and how it impacts people within the workplace. I think if anybody was at the medical education conference last week, there was a lot of stuff there, and it's very much in the arena at the moment. And quite a lot can be done in the workplace without needing a formal diagnosis if somebody's recognizing that they may have challenges, because they're challenges that everybody has to some extent. It's just that if you are more at one end of the spectrum of diversity in our population, then you may find more challenges. I don't know if anybody wants to ask me anything more about that. The straight answer is no, but we keep working on it.
I think that from my experience looking after a range of different specialties within medical training, it's not just limited to medicine with a little m. This is across all specialties and primary care training as well, and something I think fairly high up the agenda to try to sort.
Yeah. We do. So dyslexia is the only one we specifically fund. We are considering changing our provider of that, because we think that we possibly could get a bit more that would be more generic if we used a. So quite often when you go for dyslexia screening, you get quite a lot of other things that are useful about it, that helps you with your organisation, about short-term memory and so on. So we are exploring those providers, because that is something that we don't know where the budget comes from, but we do manage to have a budget. And it is, as Asha was pointing out, this is only if you're a trainee. And it is one of the other things that I find quite frustrating, is that if you're not a trainee, you don't have any study leave budget at all. So that it's hard as a department and it's maybe something I just encourage people on the back of this to think about in their departments, if you have any soft funds that you can use to support your fellows in going on sometimes very key courses, life support courses and things. They really appreciate any support that you're able to give them.
I'm going to draw things to a conclusion because we're rapidly approaching the first patient in my clinic. So
thanks for the opportunity, Tom.
That's all right. The only thing that is left for me to do is to show you the QR code, which allows you to, if you scan your QR code with your handheld digital device, it will send you to the web page where you can put in your attendance at today's Grand Round. It will send you very quickly a certificate that you can put in your CPD folder. We can record it and the DME office do this for us and keep a spreadsheet of who's come to the Grand Rounds, and but it's very useful for your records too. And you can use this QR code for any Grand Round actually, so you put in the date and the title of what you were at. So please do that. It's very helpful to us and it's helpful to you. I said in the email that next week was a gap, which is wrong. I made a mistake. Actually, next week is the Ronald Harden Awards, which is where Kevin McConville is going to coordinate and host the session. And we're hopeful that Professor Harden will be here to help adjudicate. It's the top medical student presentations of the year. These are always incredibly high quality, and there's a diverse set of topics this year. I'll send out an email with the talks over the weekend. Please do come along to that. The students really do appreciate a good turnout to the talks, and come armed with some questions to push them and nudge them a bit. So it's not a gap next week. It's the Professor Ronald Harden Awards. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks for all the comments afterwards. And I'll see you all next week.